Chapter 2 of Jimbo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 2. Miss Lake comes and goes. The conversation took place suddenly one afternoon, and no one knew anything about it except the two who took part in it. The Colonel asked the governess to try and knock the nonsense out of Jimbo's head, and the governess promised eagerly to do her very best. It was her first place, and by nonsense they both understood imagination. True enough, Jimbo's mother had given her rather different instructions as to the treatment of the boy, but she mistook the soldier's bluster for authority, and deemed it best to obey him. This was her first mistake. In reality she was not devoid of imaginative insight. It was simply that her anxiety to prove a success permitted her better judgment to be overborne by the Colonel's boisterous manner. The wisdom of the mother was greater than that of her husband. For the safe development of that tender and imaginative little boy of hers she had been at great pains to engage a girl, a clergyman's daughter, who possessed sufficient sympathy with the poetic and dreamy nature to be of real help to him. For true help, she knew, can only come from true understanding. And Miss Lake was a good girl. She was entirely well-meaning, which is the beginning of well-doing, and her principal weakness lay in her judgment, which led her to obey the Colonel too literally. "She seems most sensible," he declared to his wife. "Yes, dear." "And practical." "I think so." "And firm, and wise with children." "I hope so." "Just the sort for young Jimbo," added the Colonel with decision. "I trust so. She's a little young, perhaps." "Possibly, but one can't get everything," said her husband in his horse and dog voice. "A year with her should clean out that fanciful brain of his, and prepare him for school with other boys. He'll be all right once he gets to school. My dear," he added, spreading out his right hand, fingers extended, "you've made a most wise decision. I congratulate you. I'm delighted." "I'm so glad." "Capital! I repeat, capital! You're a clever little woman. I knew you'd find the right party, once I showed you how the land lay." The empty house that stood in its neglected garden not far from the park gates was built on a point of land that edged wedgewise into the Colonel's estate. Though something of an eyesore, therefore, he could do nothing with it. To the children it had always been an object of peculiar, though not unwholesome mystery. None of them cared to pass it on a stormy day. The wind made such odd noises in its empty corridors and rooms, and they refused point-blank to go within hailing distance of it after dark. But in Jimbo's imagination it was especially haunted, and if he had ceased to reveal to the others what he knew went on under its roof, it was only because they were unable to follow him, and were inclined to greet his extravagant recitals with, "Now, Jimbo, you know perfectly well you're only making it up." The house had been empty for many years, but to the children it had been empty since the beginning of the world, since what they called the very beginning. They believed, well, each child believed according to his own mind and powers, but there was at least one belief they all held in common, for it was generally accepted as an article of faith that the Indians, encamped among the shrubberies on the back lawn, secretly buried their dead behind the crumbling walls of its weedy garden. The dead provided by the children's battles, be it understood. Wakeful ears in the night nursery had heard strange sounds coming from that direction when the windows were open on hot summer nights, and the gardener, supreme authority in all that happened in the night, since they believed that he sat up to watch the vegetables and fruit trees ripen and never went to bed at all, was evidently of the same persuasion. When appealed to for an explanation of the mournful wind voices, he knew what was expected of him, and rose manfully to the occasion. "It's either them redskins a burying what you killed of 'em yesterday," he declared, pointing towards the empty house with a bit of broken flower pot, "or else it's the ones you killed last week, and who was always a-stealing of my strawberries." He looked very wise as he said this, and his wand of office, a dirty trowel, which he held in his hand, gave him tremendous dignity. "That's just what we thought, and of course, if you say so too, that settles it," said Nixie. "It's more'n likely, missy, leastways from what you describes, which it is an empty house all the same, though I can't say as I've heard no sounds, not very distinct, that is, myself." The gardener may have been anxious to hedge a bit, for fear of a scolding from headquarters, but his cryptic remark pleased the children greatly, because it showed, they thought, that they knew more than the gardener did. Thus the empty house remained an object of somewhat dreadful delight, lending a touch of wonderland to that part of the lane where it stood, and forming the background for many an enchanting story over the nursery fire in winter-time. It appealed vividly to their imaginations, especially to Jimbo's. Its dark windows, without blinds, were sometimes full of faces that retreated the moment they were looked at. That tangled ivy did not grow over the roof so thickly for nothing, and those high elms on the western side had not been planted years ago in a semicircle without a reason. Thus, at least, the children argued, not knowing exactly what they meant, not caring much, so long as they proved to their own satisfaction that the place was properly haunted, and therefore worthy of their attention. It was natural they should lead Miss Lake into that direction on one of their first walks together, and it was natural, too, that she should at once discover from their manner that the place was of importance. "What a queer-looking old house," she remarked, when they turned the corner of the lane and it came into view. "Almost a ruin, isn't it?" The children exchanged glances. A ruin did not seem the right sort of word for it, and besides was a little disrespectful. Also, they were not sure whether the new governess ought to be told everything so soon. She had not really won their confidence yet. After a slight pause, and a children's pause is the most eloquent imaginable, Nixie, being the eldest, said in a stiff little voice, "It's the empty house, Miss Lake. We know it very well indeed." "It looks empty," observed Miss Lake briskly. "But it's not a ruin, of course," added the child, with the cold dignity of a chosen spokesman. "Oh," said the governess, quite missing the point. She was talking lightly on the surface of things, wholly ignorant of the depths beneath her feet, intuition with her having always been sternly repressed. "It's a gamekeeper's cottage, or something like that, I suppose," she said. "Oh no, it isn't a bit." "Doesn't it belong to your father, then?" "No, it's somebody else's, you see." "Then you can't have it pulled down?" "Rather not, of course not!" exclaimed several indignant voices at once. Miss Lake perceived for the first time that it held more than ordinary importance in their mind. "Tell me about it," she said. "What is its history, and who used to live in it?" There came another pause. The children looked into each other's faces. They gazed at the blue sky overhead. Then they stared at the dusty road at their feet. But no one volunteered an answer. Miss Lake, they felt, was approaching the subject in an offensive manner. "Why are you all so mysterious about it?" she went on. "It's only a tumble-down old place, and must be very draughty to live in, even for a gamekeeper." Silence. "Come, children, don't you hear me? I'm asking you a question." A couple of startled birds flew out of the ivy with a great whirring of wings,